The predator's eyes glinted through the alien underbrush, a pair of cold, luminous orbs sizing up its prey. Lieutenant Mark Harris, alone, unarmed, and still nursing a jagged wound on his forearm, crouched low behind the wide trunk of a gnarled, alien tree. His breath came slow and measured, each exhale silenced by sheer willpower. He clutched a sharpened fragment of stone in one hand, a makeshift blade that was his only defense in this hostile wilderness. Somewhere in the dense shadows of the alien jungle, something big was stalking him, and for the first time in hours, Harris smiled. Above, cloaked in the refracting light of an almost crystalline sky, the alien observers hovered in their silent craft, invisible but watching. They had come to this planet expecting to study the untouched cycle of life on a newly discovered world. Instead, they had found a single human, a Deathworlder, as humanity was colloquially known across the galaxy, thriving where no creature should. "Is he laughing?" hissed one of the alien scientists, a serpentine being whose voice carried like wind through reeds. The edges of her blue-green scales shimmered with agitation. "Why does he look pleased?" Dr. Zyara, a being with a thin, insectoid frame and a face of glittering black facets, leaned closer to the holographic screen displaying Harris's every move. "It is not pleasure," Zyara corrected, her voice vibrating with the precision of a tuning fork. "It's focus. He's adapting, thinking ahead. Watch what he does next." On the ground, Harris sprang into action. The jungle erupted with sound as he hurled a fist-sized rock into the underbrush, the thud reverberating loudly. The predator, a sleek beast with 6 legs and a mouth filled with serrated teeth, lunged at the noise, only to find empty air. Harris had moved, quick and silent as a shadow, to its blind side. In one fluid motion, he drove his stone blade into the creature's flank, his other arm looping around its throat in a savage chokehold. The beast thrashed, its powerful legs tearing through the foliage, but Harris held on with grim determination. Finally, the predator collapsed, its struggles fading into stillness. The alien observers sat in stunned silence. "Primitive," muttered one, breaking the spell, but undeniably effective. Zyara silenced the room with a wave of her spindly arm. "You call that primitive? He just turned a fatal disadvantage into an opportunity. No weapons, no tech, just pure ingenuity and grit. And you wonder why Deathworlders are feared." The Galactic Anthropological Union had strict protocols against interference, and for now, the observers adhered to them. But watching Harris, Zyara felt the first cracks in her professional detachment. This human, marooned and stripped of the tools of his advanced civilization, was defying every expectation. On the ground, Harris wasted no time. The predator was dead, but its carcass would soon attract scavengers. He quickly fashioned a crude harness out of vines, dragging the beast's body toward a rocky outcrop he'd scouted earlier. The meat, he knew, would last for days if he could smoke it. The bones might serve as tools or weapons. As for the hide, he had plans for that too. But the jungle wasn't giving him any reprieve. High above, the canopy began to tremble as a storm gathered, dark clouds rolling in with a menacing speed. Harris glanced up, his expression unreadable. Inside the ship, Zyara's segmented fingers hovered over the control panel. "The storm will tear him apart if he doesn't find proper shelter." "Then let it," scoffed another observer. "This is why primitive species perish. Technology is survival. He's a relic, no better than the predators he kills." "Relics don't think," Zyara snapped, her mandibles clicking sharply. "And they don't win. He does both." On the ground, Harris had already begun working. Using the predator's claws, he carved into the bark of a tree, fashioning a makeshift rope. He moved with purpose, his actions precise and efficient, as if every decision had been premeditated long before he'd arrived on this forsaken planet. The first drops of acidic rain began to fall, sizzling as they hit the dense leaves overhead. Harris dragged his kill into a narrow cave, just as thunder cracked the air like a whip. The observers could only watch as the storm raged, and a lone human, armed with nothing but his wits and determination, defied nature itself. In the silence of their craft, Zyara leaned back and spoke softly. "He's not just surviving. He's conquering." The fire sputtered, a weak defiance against the relentless damp of the alien jungle. Lieutenant Mark Harris crouched beside the crude pit he'd dug into the rocky floor of his temporary cave. His hands were filthy, smeared with mud and charcoal as he struck stone against stone in rhythmic frustration. Each spark was fleeting, swallowed by the humid air before it could catch. His face remained calm, but his jaw clenched with the tension of a man racing against time. He knew the predators would come again. The jungle's symphony of clicks and howls told him they were already moving closer. Without fire, he was just another piece of meat. In the skies above, the alien observers watched in a mixture of awe and disbelief. Their cloaked vessel hovered undetected, its scanning arrays zoomed in on the lone human battling the elements. "He's inefficient," said Dr. Krex, a bulbous amphibian whose translucent skin pulsed with irritation. "His methods lack precision. If he had even rudimentary plasma tools, he'd have a roaring fire by now." "Yet, he persists," Zyara countered, her multifaceted eyes glinting in the dim light of the control room. She gestured at the display, where Harris struck the stones again and again. "Watch his hands. That's not random effort, it's controlled trial and error. He's learning." Another spark caught, flickering briefly before fading out. Harris muttered a curse under his breath, his first crack in composure, and shifted his approach. This time, he worked faster, grinding the stones together with more precision. He layered dry fibers stripped from alien plants on top of a bed of crushed leaves, shielding them from the damp. Another spark fell, and this time, it caught. The tiny ember smoldered, and Harris blew gently, his breath steady. Flames licked at the edges of the fibers, growing brighter as he fed them with care. Within moments, the cave was filled with the warm glow of firelight. Harris leaned back, a faint smirk tugging at his lips as he watched the flames spread to the larger sticks he had prepared. "That smirk," Zyara murmured, leaning closer to the screen. "It's not just satisfaction. It's confidence. He knows what this fire means." "And what does it mean?" Krex snapped, his voice dripping with skepticism. "It means he owns the night," Zyara replied. The fire transformed the cave. Shadows danced across the walls as Harris worked quickly, carving the predator's claws into crude tools and stripping its hide with efficient strokes. The beast's meat hung in strips over the flames, the smoke curling toward the rocky ceiling. The smell was acrid but rich with promise. It would be his first real meal in days. The alien observers, despite their technological superiority, couldn't look away. Their instruments captured every detail, the minute movements of Harris's hands, the tension in his shoulders, the gleam of sweat on his brow. "Do you see how he adapts?" Zyara said, gesturing toward the screen. "He's optimizing. Every movement is designed to conserve energy, every action tied to survival." Krex scoffed. "Optimizing? He's playing with sticks and rocks. Primitive behavior at best." "Primitive?" Zyara's voice sharpened. "Tell me, Krex, if you were dropped onto that planet without technology, how long would you last?" Krex flinched but didn't answer. Outside the cave, the jungle's predators circled. The firelight had drawn them in, their glowing eyes dotting the darkness like scattered stars. Harris could hear their low growls and the crunch of underbrush as they crept closer. He ignored them, focusing instead on sharpening a spear from one of the predator's bones. His hands moved steadily, his mind running calculations. When the first predator lunged into the firelight, Harris didn't flinch. He shifted his weight forward, his newly made spear held low. The creature, a smaller cousin of the beast he had already killed, hesitated, its glowing eyes reflecting the flickering flames. Harris didn't wait. With a sharp thrust, he drove the spear into the creature's side. It let out a strangled cry before collapsing, its blood pooling on the cave floor. Harris dragged the carcass closer to the fire, his expression calm, almost detached. It wasn't triumph, it was survival. In the alien craft, the tension was palpable. Even Krex had fallen silent. Zyara stared at the screen, her multifaceted eyes narrowing. "Do you understand now?" she said, her voice low but firm. "This isn't just a test of endurance. He's turning this planet into his domain. Crex shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps. But fire alone won't protect him forever. No, Zyara agreed, her voice tinged with admiration. But it will give him time. And time, for a human, is all they need. Below, Harris fed more wood into the fire, his eyes scanning the jungle for the next threat. The predators might come again. The storm might return. But for now, he was warm, fed, and ready. The jungle, vast and hostile, had become his proving ground. And he was winning. The jungle was silent in a way that set every nerve in Lieutenant Mark Harris's body on edge. It was the kind of quiet that preceded a storm or an ambush. He crouched low beneath the sprawling canopy, his hand gripping a makeshift spear carved from the bone of the predator he'd killed 2 days earlier. His ears strained for the faintest hint of movement. Something was out there, something larger than anything he had yet encountered. Above him, cloaked and invisible, the alien observers watched in tense fascination. "He's aware," Zyara said, her voice a low hum. Her insectoid limbs twitched as she leaned closer to the holographic display. "His instincts are sharper than I expected. He can feel the shift in the environment." "Instincts mean nothing if he walks into the creature's path," Crex retorted, his amphibious features tightening with skepticism. "Humans may be resourceful, but against an apex predator of this magnitude, even their ingenuity has limits." Zyara said nothing, her gaze fixed on Harris. She didn't believe in limits, not for him. Harris moved like a shadow through the jungle, his steps measured and deliberate. He'd scouted this area the previous day, noting the faint markings on trees and the disturbed underbrush that suggested a large creature's territory. Now, those signs were fresher. The predator was close. He paused near a stream, crouching to examine the tracks pressed into the muddy bank. They were deep, clawed impressions the size of dinner plates. Harris let out a slow breath, his mind racing through calculations. The creature was massive, quadrupedal, and likely a top-tier predator. But it wasn't invincible. Nothing was. He glanced at his spear, then at the surrounding terrain. The stream fed into a narrow ravine flanked by jagged rocks and dense vegetation. A plan began to form in his mind, a trap that would require precision, speed, and just enough bait to lure the beast into a fatal mistake. Inside the alien vessel, the tension was palpable. The observers monitored every movement Harris made, their discussions oscillating between admiration and disbelief. "He's setting a trap," Zyara observed, her multifaceted eyes glinting with approval. "He's not just surviving, he's strategizing." "It's reckless," Crex scoffed. "He's risking everything on the assumption that this creature will behave predictably. One mistake, and he's finished." "Reckless or not," Zyara countered, "he's using what he has. This is the essence of Deathworlders, they don't wait for survival to come to them. They take it." Harris worked quickly, using vines to fashion a tripline between 2 sturdy trees at the edge of the ravine. He reinforced it with sharpened stakes hidden beneath leaves, their tips coated in a resin he'd tested on smaller creatures to ensure its lethality. The entire setup was crude but effective, a blend of intuition, observation, and sheer audacity. As he tied the final knot, a guttural growl rumbled through the jungle, deep and resonant. Harris froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound came again, closer this time. The beast was hunting him. He positioned himself behind a cluster of rocks, his spear at the ready. The minutes stretched into an eternity as he waited, every muscle in his body coiled like a spring. Then it appeared. The creature was enormous, its sleek, scaled body rippling with muscle. Four eyes scanned the terrain with predatory focus, its nostrils flaring as it caught Harris's scent. It moved with a terrifying grace, its claws slicing through the underbrush like blades. Harris stayed perfectly still, letting the beast close the distance. When it was within range of the tripline, he stood and let out a sharp, piercing yell. The creature roared in response, charging straight at him. The tripline snapped taut. The stake sprang upward, driving into the creature's underside with brutal force. It howled in pain, thrashing wildly, but Harris was already moving. He darted forward, his spear aimed for the exposed neck. With a powerful thrust, he drove the weapon deep, twisting it with all his strength. The creature collapsed in a heap, its massive body shuddering before finally going still. The alien vessel erupted with noise as the observers struggled to process what they had just witnessed. "Impossible," Krex muttered, his bulbous eyes wide. He brought it down with a sharpened stick and a handful of vines. "Not impossible," Zyara corrected, her voice tinged with pride. "Human." Krex turned to her, his expression incredulous. "Why are you so invested in this creature?" "He's a primitive, nothing more." Zyara's mandibles clicked softly. "Because he's proving us wrong. Every moment he survives, he challenges everything we thought we understood about strength and intelligence. Do you not see it? He's not just adapting to this world, he's mastering it." Harris knelt beside the fallen predator, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He examined the creature, noting its armor-like scales and the powerful muscles that had almost made it his undoing. This kill wasn't just a victory, it was a warning to the jungle, a statement that he wasn't prey. As he began the arduous process of harvesting the beast's hide and meat, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Survival wasn't just about endurance. It was about control, over the environment, over fear, and over the odds stacked against him. And as the jungle quieted once more, Harris knew one thing for certain: this world wasn't killing him. He was conquering it. The crackle of the fire was the only sound in the cave, its warm glow bouncing off the jagged walls. Lieutenant Mark Harris sat cross-legged, sharpening his spear with slow, deliberate strokes. His eyes flicked to the cave entrance every few moments, tracking the faint rustles and distant growls of the jungle. He had no intention of being surprised. Not again. But it wasn't just the predators outside that concerned him. For the past 2 nights, Harris had felt the weight of unseen eyes. Not the glowing, animalistic ones that stalked him from the shadows, but something else. Something intelligent. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, and not by the jungle. High above, in the cloaked alien craft, Zyara's fingers hovered over the console. She had been studying Harris for days, observing every decision, every moment of ingenuity, every hard-fought victory. But now, the tables were turning. "He knows we're here," Zyara murmured, her mandibles clicking softly. Krex scoffed, the translucent membrane of his skin rippling in disbelief. "Impossible. Our cloaking technology is undetectable to a species as primitive as his." "And yet," Zyara said, gesturing to the screen, "he's changed his behavior. He's more cautious. His gaze lingers on empty spaces as if he's trying to spot something. His instincts are sharper than you give him credit for." Krex leaned closer, his bulbous eyes narrowing. "Instincts are not proof of awareness." "Perhaps," Zyara said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "But instincts are why he's still alive." Harris finished sharpening the spear and set it aside. Standing, he moved to the cave entrance and crouched low, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. He had set trip lines around the perimeter, each rigged with crude noisemakers made from bones and vines. The jungle was loud, but to a trained ear like his, silence was louder. And right now, the silence was deafening. "Come on," Harris muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "Show yourself." As if on cue, a faint shimmer rippled in the air above the tree line. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but Harris caught it. His breath hitched, and his hand instinctively tightened around the shaft of his spear. There it was again, a distortion, like heat waves rising off asphalt. He didn't know what it was, but he knew it wasn't natural. And whatever it was, it had been watching him. "Did you see that?" Krex's voice was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the control room. He reacted. "He saw us." Zyara's mandibles clicked, her multifaceted eyes narrowing as she replayed the footage. "He didn't see us. He sensed us. There's a difference." "Semantics," Krex snapped. "If he continues to observe us, we'll risk exposing ourselves." "And whose fault is that?" Zyara countered, her tone colder than usual. "Our cloaking field is failing because you insisted on pushing the scanners beyond their limits." If he's detecting us, it's because of your carelessness. Krex sputtered, but he couldn't argue. The truth was undeniable. Harris's uncanny ability to adapt was proving more formidable than they had anticipated. Harris's mind raced as he observed the shimmering distortion. His gut told him to strike, to hurl his spear and test whether the thing watching him could bleed. But he held back. Whatever it was, it hadn't attacked. Yet. Instead, he reached for a smoldering branch from the fire and hurled it toward the distortion. The burning wood sailed through the air, landing harmlessly in the jungle beyond, but the sudden movement disrupted the shimmer. For a fleeting moment, Harris glimpsed the outline of a sleek, metallic vessel hanging just above the treetops. His jaw tightened. Figures, he muttered to himself. Aliens. Inside the craft, the tension was palpable. He knows, Zyara said, her voice low. There's no doubt now. Krex's scales flushed an iridescent green, a sign of agitation. Then we must leave. The protocol. Forget the protocol, Zyara snapped. This isn't just an observation anymore. This is a confrontation. Harris stood at the cave entrance, his mind racing. The shimmering distortion had vanished, but he knew it would return. He didn't know why they were watching him or what they wanted, but he did know one thing. If they were studying him, they'd better be ready for a lesson. The dawn was sluggish, its pale light creeping reluctantly through the dense canopy of the alien jungle. Lieutenant Mark Harris sat on a rock near the remnants of his fire, sharpening a fresh spear. His mind was restless. The previous night's discovery, an alien craft cloaked above the treetops, had shifted the game entirely. He wasn't just surviving a hostile planet anymore, he was a subject, studied like some kind of lab rat. Harris hated the feeling. They're still out there, he muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the sky. His instincts told him he wasn't wrong. Whoever, or whatever, was watching him wouldn't give up so easily. They wanted to see what he was made of. Fine. Let them. Inside the cloaked alien craft, the tension among the observers was palpable. Dr. Krex paced the control room, his bulbous eyes flicking nervously between holographic displays. The shimmering projection of Harris's camp dominated the central screen. He's becoming too aware, Krex said, his voice tight. If he decides to attack, our field won't hold. He's already testing its limits. And yet, Zyara said, her tone calm but firm, we're still here. Why do you think that is? Krex stopped pacing. What are you implying? I'm saying he hasn't attacked us because he doesn't see us as an enemy, yet. Zyara's multifaceted eyes glimmered as she studied Harris's figure on the screen. This is our chance. If we don't engage him now, we risk losing the opportunity to learn the full extent of his species' capabilities. Krex's translucent skin rippled with unease. Engage him? That's against every protocol. Protocols don't matter if we leave this planet with no answers, Zyara snapped. We've spent days watching him defy every expectation. We owe it to ourselves, and to our understanding of his kind, to make contact. Harris was tending to the fire when he heard it, a faint, high-pitched hum, like the whine of a distant turbine. He looked up sharply, his grip tightening on his spear. The sound grew louder, closer, until it seemed to vibrate in the very air around him. Then, it stopped. Harris froze, his eyes locked on the edge of the clearing. A faint ripple in the air caught his attention, like the surface of water disturbed by a breeze. Slowly, the shimmer resolved into a figure, a tall, insectoid being with a slender frame and glinting black facets where its eyes should have been. It moved cautiously, its spindly limbs raised in a gesture that Harris instinctively recognized as non-threatening. Well, Harris muttered, rising to his feet and hefting his spear. Guess you decided to say hello. The alien tilted its head, its mandibles clicking softly. When it spoke, its voice was melodic, vibrating with a strange, harmonic quality. We mean no harm, it said in halting English, its voice precise but unfamiliar. You are remarkable. Harris snorted, keeping his weapon raised. That's one way to put it. You've been watching me, haven't you? The alien hesitated, then nodded. We observe. We study. Your resilience, it is beyond expectation. Harris's grip on the spear loosened slightly, though his wariness didn't fade. You're not the first to underestimate humans. The alien took a step closer, its movements deliberate. My name is Zyara. I have watched you adapt, survive, and overcome. I wish to understand. Harris raised an eyebrow. Understand what? What makes your kind so? Zyara paused, searching for the word. Indomitable. Harris let out a dry laugh. Indomitable, huh? You're not the first to ask that either. But I'll tell you this, if you're trying to figure out what makes us tick, watching from a distance won't cut it. Zyara's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Then perhaps it is time we learned, together. Back aboard the alien craft, chaos erupted as the other observers realized what Zyara had done. Krex slammed a webbed hand onto the console, his translucent skin flashing with alarm. She's broken protocol. Direct contact is forbidden. One of the junior observers turned to him. Do we intervene? Krex hesitated, his bulbous eyes flicking toward the screen where Zyara and Harris stood face to face. Despite his outrage, even he couldn't deny the significance of the moment. No, he said finally, his voice grudging. Let her finish what she started. Harris and Zyara stood in the clearing, the silence between them heavy with unspoken questions. For the first time in days, Harris felt something other than hostility or survival instinct. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the faint glimmer of understanding. All right, Harris said finally, lowering his spear. You want to learn about humans? Start with this, you're not going to learn anything by hiding. You want answers? Get your hands dirty. Zyara inclined her head. Then I will. And for the first time, Harris allowed himself a small, genuine smile. Good. Let's see what you're made of. The jungle burned with light, a tapestry of chaos and survival. Smoke curled into the sky from the makeshift torches Harris had rigged to keep the predators at bay. The ground beneath his feet trembled, a prelude to the eruption building miles away, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to run. But Lieutenant Mark Harris didn't run. Not yet. Beside him, Zyara's tall, insectoid frame loomed in stark contrast to his, her mandibles clicking nervously. She clutched an alien device in one of her spindly hands, its surface glowing faintly with symbols Harris didn't understand. The seismic activity is escalating, she said, her melodic voice laced with urgency. The mountain will erupt in minutes. We have to evaluate. Tell me something I don't know, Harris muttered, his hands busy tying the last of his crude supplies into a makeshift pack. He glanced at Zyara, his expression sharp. You said your ship has the capacity to shield us from the eruption. Why haven't you used it? Zyara hesitated, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. It is prohibited. The observers have strict protocols against interference. Harris let out a harsh laugh. Interference? You've been watching me fight for my life like a lab rat, and now you're worried about breaking your rules? Zyara's mandibles twitched in what Harris had come to interpret as frustration. It is not my decision. The council will. Forget the council, Harris snapped, stepping closer. You want to know what makes humans different? It's this, we don't wait for someone else to save us. We figure it out. So, you're either with me, or you get out of my way. For a moment, the two stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Then Zyara nodded, her movements sharp and decisive. Very well. Follow me. In the alien craft, chaos reigned. The other observers watched as Zyara and Harris sprinted through the jungle, the holographic display tracking their every move. She's endangering everything. Krex bellowed, slamming a webbed hand on the console. This is an egregious breach of protocol. Enough, another observer interjected, their voice calm but firm. We have been watching this human survive against impossible odds. Perhaps it is time we learned from him. Krex glared but said nothing. On the screen, Harris and Zyara were nearing the edge of the jungle, where the terrain gave way to rocky slopes leading toward the erupting volcano. The air grew hotter as the pair ascended, the ground beneath them trembling with increasing violence. Harris adjusted his pack, his breathing steady despite the strain. Beside him, Zyara moved with an alien grace, her slender limbs navigating the rocky terrain with ease. Ahead, Harris spotted the shimmering outline of the alien craft, still cloaked but faintly visible in the ash-filled air. "That's your ship?" he asked, glancing at Zyara. "Yes," she replied. "If we can reach it, I can override the protocols and activate the shielding systems." "Then we'd better move faster," Harris said, his tone grim. Behind them, the jungle had erupted into chaos, with predators fleeing the encroaching lava. The roar of the volcano grew louder, a deep, earth-shaking rumble that seemed to come from the planet's core. As they neared the craft, a fissure split the ground ahead of them, spewing molten rock. Harris grabbed Zyara's arm and pulled her back just in time. "No room for mistakes," he said, his voice sharp. "Go around." Inside the craft, Zyara's spindly fingers flew across the control panel, bypassing layers of security protocols. Harris stood beside her, his eyes scanning the displays. "Can this thing shield more than just the ship?" he asked. Zyara glanced at him, her mandibles clicking. "If I reroute the power systems, yes. But it will only hold for a short time." "Do it," Harris said. "We'll figure out the rest later." As Zyara worked, the other observers appeared as holographic projections, their voices a cacophony of outrage and disbelief. "You are violating every tenet of our mission," Krex shouted. Zyara didn't look up. "And yet we're still here, Krex. Because of him." The shield activated just as the volcano erupted in full force. A dome of shimmering energy enveloped the area, deflecting the initial wave of molten rock and ash. Harris watched as the landscape outside was consumed, his chest tight with adrenaline. "It's holding," Zyara said, though her voice trembled. "For now." "Good," Harris replied. "Now let's make sure it stays that way." As the shield strained against the force of the eruption, Harris worked alongside Zyara, following her instructions to stabilize the system. It was a tense, grueling process, but together they managed to keep the barrier intact long enough for the worst of the eruption to subside. When it was over, Harris leaned back in his chair, exhausted but alive. "Well," he said, glancing at Zyara, "I'd say that's a win." Zyara studied him for a moment, her multifaceted eyes unreadable. "You are unlike any being I have ever encountered." Harris smirked. "That's humanity for you." The Alien Council would not forgive Zyara's actions, but it didn't matter. In the days that followed, she and Harris worked together, sharing knowledge and forging an understanding that transcended their differences. For Harris, survival was no longer the only goal. He was building something greater, a bridge between two worlds. And for the first time since he'd crashed on this hostile planet, he felt a glimmer of hope. They had witnessed humanity's resilience. And now, they would never forget